They thought I would let them take my childhood home. Here's how I stood up to my parents and won. My name is Daniel Thompson, and I have always considered myself an ordinary Londoner. Born and raised in a modest yet proud home in Kensington, I spent my childhood wandering the narrow cobbled streets, inhaling the smell of rain-soaked brick, and listening to the faint hum of the city that never truly slept. Our house stood at the end of a quiet lane, surrounded by towering trees that swayed with the English wind. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours, a sanctuary built on decades of family memories, laughter, and, sometimes, silence that spoke volumes more than words ever could. From an early age, I understood the peculiar rhythm of our family. My father, Thomas, was a man of routines and silent judgments, a towering presence whose opinion seemed to echo through the walls. My mother, Margaret, gentle yet formidable, could soften a storm with her smile or intensify it with a sharp glance. And then there was my brother, William, a charming, seemingly untroubled young man whose life appeared to move effortlessly in a straight line, as if the universe had granted him a privilege I had yet to understand. For years, I watched William grow, celebrating his triumphs quietly from the sidelines, knowing that the spotlight would always find him first. But it was our family home that bound us together, a place of shared dinners, whispered secrets, and a stability I relied upon more than I realized. That house was more than walls and furniture, it was the ledger of our lives, every scratch on the wooden floor, every faded photograph, a testament to who we were. The first hint of trouble came subtly, almost imperceptibly, like the distant rumble of a storm I refused to acknowledge. It was a crisp morning in late November when Margaret casually mentioned, over tea and toast, that William was to be married. I nodded, offering congratulations with a smile that felt forced. Wedding plans had always been part of our family's conversations, but this felt different. Her words carried an unspoken weight, a hidden agenda I couldn't yet place. Later that day, my father joined the discussion, his tone more authoritative, more insistent. "You'll understand, Daniel," he said, stirring his cup absent-mindedly. "The house is far too large for just the two of us. It's practical to consider arrangements that serve the family." I blinked. "Arrangements?" I asked cautiously. "What do you mean?" He met my gaze with that peculiar stillness he always held, the kind that could silence a room. "It's time the home prepares for the future, for William's new life. Perhaps selling it is the most prudent course." A cold knot formed in my stomach. The thought of selling our home, a place where every brick carried the echo of my childhood, was almost unbearable. I tried to mask my panic, to maintain a calm exterior, but inside, a storm was building. "But this house, it's ours," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "I grew up here. You can't just decide to sell it without considering me." Margaret's hand rested on his arm, a gesture of silent agreement, a conspiratorial glance that made me feel suddenly alien in the very place I had always called home. "Daniel, it's not just about you anymore," she said softly. "It's about the family. William's future. The wedding. Everything has to be prepared accordingly." I remember the moment as if etched in crystal, my father's quiet nod, my mother's almost imperceptible sigh, and the realization that my voice, my presence, might not matter as much as I had always believed. That evening, I wandered through the house, tracing the familiar edges of the staircase railing, touching the walls where my hands had left marks as a boy. I could almost hear the echoes of laughter, the soft scuff of Max's paws on the wooden floor, and the distant, muffled sound of the city. This house was my anchor, and suddenly, it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Days turned into weeks, and discussions of selling the house became more frequent, more insistent. My protests, initially sharp and defiant, began to wear thin in the face of my parents' resolute stance. Friends and distant relatives were pulled into the orbit of the decision, each offering unsolicited advice that tilted firmly against me. "It's just practical," they said. "The market is perfect now. You'll understand when you're older." But I could not understand. I could not reconcile their rationalizations with the gut-wrenching reality that I might lose the one constant in my life. By the time William returned from a business trip to discuss wedding plans, tension had settled like a storm cloud over our family. He entered the room with his usual easy smile, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, about the brewing conflict. "Daniel," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "you'll want to be involved in the plans, won't you?" His words were casual, but beneath the surface, I sensed an imperceptible alliance with our parents, a unity I was not part of. And so it began, the quiet, unspoken war over a home that meant everything to me, a battle fought not with weapons but with words, documents, and the subtle machinations of familial authority. The days ahead promised to test every fiber of my being, to force me to confront my deepest fears and insecurities. Little did I know that the fight for our house would not just be about property, but about identity, belonging, and reclaiming the life I thought was secure. The morning after William's arrival, the air in the house felt heavier, almost suffocating. I could sense it in every corner, the silence that stretched between rooms, the sharp glances exchanged over breakfast, and the polite, yet pointed, comments that felt like veiled attacks. William, oblivious to the storm brewing within me, spoke of flower arrangements, seating plans, and caterers with an ease that irritated me more than I cared to admit. "You'll want to see the florist's proposals," he said, tapping a folder full of glossy pictures on the dining table. "I've made sure they understand the theme, classic, timeless, just like Mum always wanted." I nodded, my fingers brushing over the edge of the folder. Inside, every photograph was a reminder that the house was no longer a sanctuary, it was a prop in William's new life, a stepping stone in his carefully curated narrative. "I'll take a look," I murmured, forcing a smile that did not reach my eyes. Later that day, I retreated to the library, my sanctuary within a sanctuary. The room smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, a comforting scent that reminded me I had once been able to lose myself here for hours. I opened a drawer in my desk, pulling out a folder of documents I had secretly kept, records of the house, receipts, and legal papers that I had collected over the years. If I was going to fight, I would need more than anger, would need evidence, strategy, and allies. My mind raced as I formulated a plan. I needed to understand my rights, the legal standing of the house, and the loopholes my parents might exploit. I spent hours on the computer, reading property laws, tenancy rights, and inheritance regulations specific to London. The deeper I delved, the more I realized that I was not powerless, at least, not entirely. There were paths, legal avenues, and procedural steps that could tilt the scales in my favor. That evening, I confronted my father in the living room, the firelight casting long shadows across his stern face. "Thomas, I've done some research," I began, careful to keep my voice steady. "This house is not just a financial asset. It's a shared family home, and I have legal rights here. Selling it without my consent isn't as simple as you might think." His brow furrowed slightly, a mixture of surprise and irritation flickering in his eyes. "Daniel," he said slowly, "we're only trying to do what's best for the family. You're overcomplicating matters." "I'm not overcomplicating," I shot back, the words sharper than intended. "I'm protecting my life, my memories, and what I've worked for. This house isn't just a commodity, it's part of me." Margaret appeared behind him, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, trying to smooth over the tension like a practiced mediator. "Daniel, perhaps we can find a compromise," she suggested, her voice soft yet firm. "We don't want conflict, but we must think about the future." Compromise. The word felt hollow to me, a thin veil over the reality that my home was being threatened. I nodded curtly, masking my frustration, but inside, I was already planning my next move. I knew that this was only the beginning. William's marriage, his carefully planned life, and the decisions of my parents were colliding with my own existence, and I would not back down. Over the following weeks, tensions escalated. Family dinners became arenas for subtle jabs and pointed questions. Every mention of the house, every discussion of wedding arrangements, felt like a calculated maneuver against me. William's charm, which once seemed harmless, now felt like an intentional tactic, designed to make me appear unreasonable or out of touch. One evening, as rain streaked the windows and the city beyond seemed indifferent to our private drama, I sat alone in the library, drafting letters, preparing statements, and organizing documents. I realized that if I were to win this battle, I could not rely solely on emotion. I needed strategy, persistence, and courage. I needed to remind my parents and my brother that while the house could be bought or sold, the memories, loyalty, and respect I commanded were not for sale. The first legal step was to meet with a solicitor specializing in property law and inheritance rights. I had a quiet appointment scheduled for the next morning, and I spent the night preparing, rehearsing arguments in front of the mirror, and imagining scenarios where I would emerge victorious. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, a steady, reassuring presence as I plotted the course of my resistance. By the time William and my parents awoke, I had made my decision. I would not allow sentimentality or family pressure to sway me. I would stand firm, armed with knowledge, evidence, and unwavering resolve. This house was not just wood and brick, it was my legacy, my identity, and my responsibility. And I was determined to protect it, no matter the cost. The next morning, as I stepped out into the foggy London streets, briefcase in hand, I felt a rare surge of empowerment. The city's grey skies mirrored the uncertainty ahead, yet each step I took toward the solicitor's office felt decisive. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tremors of fear replaced by the steady pulse of determination. The battle for my home, my past, and my dignity was only beginning, but I was ready. The morning sun broke through the fog over Kensington, casting pale gold streaks across the rooftops. I gripped my briefcase tightly as I walked briskly toward the solicitor's office. Every footstep echoed in the narrow streets, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat, a blend of anticipation, anxiety, and determination. Today marked the first real step in reclaiming my home, and I felt the weight of generations pressing on my shoulders. Inside the solicitor's office, I was greeted by a calm, composed woman named Eleanor Hartley. She exuded authority, and her keen eyes immediately assessed my resolve. I explained my situation, the attempted sale of the family home, my legal rights, and the subtle pressure exerted by my parents and brother. Eleanor listened attentively, nodding occasionally, her fingers tapping lightly on the polished oak desk. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice steady, "your case is delicate, but not without merit. There are several options we can pursue to protect your interest in the property. First, we can request an injunction to temporarily prevent any sale or transfer. Second, we can review the ownership structure and your legal entitlement. Finally, we can prepare to negotiate with your parents and brother, though given the tension, litigation may be necessary." I absorbed her words, feeling a flicker of hope. "So it's possible," I asked cautiously, "to stop them from selling the house before I have a say?" "Yes," she confirmed, "but you must act swiftly and decisively. Time is a critical factor in cases like this." Armed with newfound clarity, I returned home, determined to implement our plan. I approached my parents with a mixture of defiance and diplomacy, presenting a formal letter from Eleanor outlining the legal standing of the property and my intention to protect it. The reaction was immediate and explosive. My father's face hardened, and Margaret's composure faltered for the first time in weeks. William looked between us, his earlier charm replaced with an unfamiliar tension, as if for the first time he recognized that I would not step aside. "You can't do this," Thomas exclaimed, his voice resonating through the drawing room. "This house belongs to the family, our family. You are overstepping, Daniel." "I'm not overstepping," I said firmly, meeting his gaze. "I am ensuring that my rights are respected. This house is part of my life, not just a tool for someone else's convenience. I will not allow it to be treated as if it were disposable." Margaret stepped forward, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Daniel, we only wanted what was best for William, for the wedding. Please try to understand." "I do understand," I replied, my voice softening but my resolve unbroken. "And that is precisely why I cannot allow this to happen without my consent." The tension escalated over the following days. Every conversation about the house became a battlefield of words and subtle maneuvers. William tried to persuade me with charm and flattery, often leaving small gifts or arranging friendly outings to soften me. I appreciated the effort, but I was no longer swayed. I had chosen a path, and I would see it through. With Eleanor's guidance, I filed for a temporary injunction. The process was meticulous and exhausting, requiring precise documentation, affidavits, and evidence of my family's intent to proceed with the sale. Each step was a reminder of the power dynamics I was up against, and yet, I felt a growing sense of control. For the first time in weeks, I was not reacting to the storm, I was shaping it. One evening, as I reviewed documents in the study, William approached quietly. His earlier bravado had faded, replaced by something more earnest, almost vulnerable. "Daniel," he said, standing near the doorway, "I didn't realize how much this house means to you, to us, in a way. Maybe I've been selfish." I looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his eyes. "It's not about selfishness, William. It's about respect, for the past, for each other, and for what is truly ours." He nodded slowly. "I don't want to be the reason you lose something so important." That night, I lay awake listening to the muffled sounds of London streets. I felt a cautious optimism, like the first fragile tendrils of sunlight piercing through a stormy sky. The legal steps were only the beginning, but they represented more than bureaucracy. They were a declaration, would not be erased, overlooked, or silenced. In the following weeks, our home became a stage for negotiations, arguments, and subtle acts of defiance. My parents vacillated between anger, guilt, and begrudging recognition of my resolve. William, though still my brother, was no longer an unchallenged force. I realized that the fight was not simply for property, it was for acknowledgement, fairness, and the preservation of my identity within the family. By the time the court date approached, I had amassed a detailed case, supported by Eleanor's guidance, my meticulous documentation, and a clear narrative of ownership and entitlement. Each day leading up to the hearing was tense, filled with uncertainty, but also a growing confidence that I could, and would, reclaim my home. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse with my head held high. The city outside was bustling, indifferent to the private battle I was about to wage within its walls. Yet, in that moment, I felt empowered. I had faced resistance, navigated legal complexities, and confronted the uncomfortable truths about my family. Today, I was not merely defending a house, I was defending my right to exist, to be heard, and to shape the course of my own life. The day of the hearing arrived with an overcast sky that seemed to mirror the tension I felt inside. Kensington was unusually quiet as I made my way to the courthouse, my briefcase clutched tightly in one hand, Eleanor Hartley walking calmly beside me. The streets that I had known my entire life now felt distant, almost surreal, as if I had entered a different world, a world where everything I loved could be decided in the hands of strangers wearing black robes. Inside the courthouse, the air was heavy with anticipation. I could see my parents seated in the public gallery, Thomas's jaw tense, Margaret clutching her handbag tightly, and William sitting with an air of composed frustration. For the first time, I noticed the cracks in the facade of their confidence, subtle tremors in their carefully maintained poise. They had underestimated me, and the realization seemed to unsettle them more than they could admit. The hearing began, and the room settled into a silence broken only by the soft rustling of papers. Eleanor presented my case with precision and poise, outlining my legal rights, the shared history of the family home, and the implications of a sale without my consent. She spoke not only with authority but with a narrative that humanized my struggle, the countless years I had invested in the home, the memories etched into its walls, and the emotional toll of the potential loss. I watched my parents' reactions closely. Thomas shifted in his seat, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest, while Margaret's lips pressed together, betraying the internal conflict that I had only begun to glimpse. William, ever the confident brother, now looked uncertain, his previous composure faltering under the weight of the evidence and emotion presented. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, feeling the gaze of the court upon me. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me, "this house is more than a property. It is a repository of our family's history, a place that has shaped who I am. To sell it without my consent would not only be a legal oversight but a profound personal injustice. I spoke of childhood mornings spent in the kitchen with Margaret, afternoons in the backyard with Max, evenings listening to my father's quiet reflections by the fireplace. I described every small corner of the house, every memory tied to its walls, not as an attempt to manipulate, but to show that the house was inseparable from the life it contained. My words hung in the air, the gravity of my sincerity resonating through the courtroom. The judge, a stern yet fair woman with sharp eyes, listened intently. When she asked questions, I answered with honesty, never exaggerating, but allowing the depth of my connection to the home to shine through. Eleanor guided me through the technicalities, and together, we navigated the complex interplay of law and family dynamics. Hours passed, each moment thick with anticipation. The courtroom became a crucible, exposing vulnerabilities, alliances, and the raw emotions that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. My parents attempted to argue practicality, finances, and family priorities, but the weight of my evidence and testimony made their words seem hollow, even to them. Finally, the judge called a brief recess, and I found myself outside in the cool London air, the muffled sounds of traffic grounding me. I could see William approaching, his expression conflicted. "Daniel," he said quietly, I didn't realize you felt so strongly. Maybe I've been blind, maybe I've taken too much for granted. I hope you understand now," I replied, "that this isn't about defiance or obstinacy. It's about respect, recognition, and preserving what is meaningful." The remainder of the day passed in a blur of testimony, cross-examinations, and meticulous legal arguments. By evening, the judge retired to consider the ruling, leaving all of us in a tension-filled silence that stretched long into the night. At home, we gathered in the living room, each of us silent, the walls of the house seeming to absorb our unspoken fears and hopes. Finally, the verdict was delivered the following morning. The judge ruled in my favor, acknowledging my legal rights and emphasizing the importance of mutual respect and consideration in family decisions regarding property. The relief that washed over me was immense, mingled with a complex mixture of triumph and lingering sadness for the fractures the conflict had caused. My parents, subdued and reflective, finally expressed a measure of remorse. "Daniel," Margaret said softly, her voice tinged with emotion, "we may have been wrong to overlook your feelings. We didn't understand how much this meant to you." Thomas nodded, his usual stern demeanor softened. "Perhaps we were blinded by our own plans. I hope we can begin to repair what has been strained." Even William, though quietly, admitted his missteps. "I never realized. I wasn't aware of the impact this had on you. I'm sorry." In that moment, standing within the home that had defined so much of my life, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and renewal. The battle had been hard, the emotions raw, and the path uncertain, but I had not only reclaimed my home, I had reclaimed a sense of agency, dignity, and belonging. Walking through the familiar rooms, touching the worn surfaces and the familiar corners, I realized that this house was no longer just a building. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to standing firm in the face of adversity, and a reminder that our lives are shaped as much by the courage to protect what we love as by the love itself. The morning after the ruling, London seemed transformed, as if the city itself acknowledged the victory I had won. The fog that often blanketed Kensington had lifted, revealing pale sunlight that shimmered off the rooftops and glinted on the cobblestone streets. I walked through the halls of our home, tracing the familiar contours of the rooms, feeling a renewed sense of ownership, not just legally, but emotionally. This house was, finally, fully mine again, and the knowledge brought a deep, almost overwhelming sense of relief. My parents were quieter than usual, contemplative. They had not vanished into denial or frustration as they might have before. Instead, they were slowly beginning to absorb the reality of the situation. Margaret approached me that afternoon, her voice gentle, tinged with remorse. "Daniel, I realize now that we allowed our focus on William's future to cloud our judgment. We didn't consider how this house, how your life, would be affected." I looked at her, studying the lines of worry that framed her face, and saw an honesty I hadn't before. "Thank you, Mum. It means a lot that you understand. I've never wanted to hurt anyone, I just needed this place to stay a part of my life." Thomas, while still reserved, also softened. I underestimated your resolve, Daniel. It was wrong of me to think we could disregard your feelings. Perhaps this has taught us all a lesson about family, communication, and respect. Even William, now more reflective than I had seen him in years, admitted his shortcomings. I focused so much on my wedding, on my plans. I didn't see what was important to you. I'm sorry for that. The acknowledgement from all three of them was not just a formality, it felt like a genuine step toward rebuilding trust. Slowly, conversations became less tense. Dinners, once silent or edged with subtle arguments, regained a warmth reminiscent of earlier times. It was not perfect, some memories of the past weeks lingered, and small tensions remained, but there was a foundation upon which to rebuild. With the legal battles behind me, I began to focus on personal projects I had put aside. I renovated the study, adding shelves and creating a small library of books I had long wanted to collect. I transformed the backyard into a space where Max's absence was softened by the careful planting of flowers and shrubs that would bloom each year, a living tribute to continuity and memory. Beyond the home itself, I felt an internal shift. The fight had been exhausting, emotionally and mentally, but it had also shown me the depths of my own resilience. I realized that asserting oneself, defending one's principles, and maintaining dignity in the face of pressure were not acts of selfishness, they were essential to living authentically. I felt stronger, more capable, and more connected to who I truly was. One afternoon, as I sat in the sunlit study, William entered quietly. He had a folder in his hands, looking slightly nervous. "Daniel, I wanted to show you something," he said, placing the papers on my desk. It was a set of plans for the wedding, but not just the usual seating charts and floral arrangements. These plans included subtle nods to family history, to traditions we had shared, and even to corners of the house that had been significant to me. He had thought to include my perspective, my memories, and my preferences, a small but meaningful gesture of reconciliation. I looked at him, surprised and moved. "Thank you, William," I said sincerely. "This means a lot. It shows that you understand now." He nodded, a faint smile forming. "I do. And I want us to move forward, not just for the wedding, but as a family." That evening, as the sun set over Kensington, casting golden light through the tall windows of our living room, I felt a profound sense of peace. The house was still ours, and perhaps more importantly, the bonds of family, though tested, were beginning to mend. I realized that while the fight had been difficult, it had been necessary. It had allowed me to assert my identity, reclaim my home, and remind those I loved that respect and understanding were essential for any relationship to thrive. Walking through the familiar rooms, touching the polished surfaces and the familiar corners, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This house was no longer just a structure of bricks and mortar, it was a testament to resilience, compromise, and the enduring power of family. And as I looked out the window at the London skyline, I knew that the lessons learned here, about standing firm, about communication, and about understanding, would shape the rest of my life. The weeks following the court ruling were marked by a cautious, yet noticeable, shift in our household. The tension that had gripped every corner of our home slowly began to dissolve, replaced by a tentative harmony that felt almost foreign after so many months of conflict. London's winter had begun to soften, and the light that filtered through the tall windows brought warmth into the rooms, reflecting the subtle thawing of relationships that had once seemed irreparably strained. I spent mornings wandering through the house, attending to small repairs, organizing memories, and creating spaces that reflected both my past and my present. Each room was infused with the life I had fought so hard to protect, a silent celebration of resilience and determination. And yet, it was not merely the preservation of the physical space that mattered, it was the preservation of my voice, my agency, and the integrity of my family bonds. Margaret began inviting me into conversations about the household that had once excluded me. She asked for my opinions on decor, on family plans, and on how to honor our traditions in ways that were meaningful to all of us. Thomas, whose sternness often masked a deep concern for family, began to acknowledge my presence in discussions where previously he had assumed authority alone. Even William, now aware of the delicate balance between personal ambition and family loyalty, made a conscious effort to include me in decisions and plans, bridging gaps that had seemed insurmountable. One crisp afternoon, we gathered in the living room to discuss the upcoming wedding. The tension that had once shadowed every conversation was replaced with tentative camaraderie. William smiled, extending a hand in a gesture that was both familiar and new. "Daniel, I want you to be involved, not just because of the house, but because you're my brother. Your insight matters." I shook his hand, feeling a surge of gratitude and recognition. "Thank you, William. That means a lot to me." Margaret joined us, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I am sorry for how we handled things before. I hope we can move forward with understanding and respect." Thomas, standing nearby with a quiet dignity, nodded. "We've all learned something important. Let's ensure this house continues to be a place where family can thrive, together." In the following days, we worked together on preparations, sharing responsibilities, stories, and laughter. For the first time in months, the house felt alive with unity, not conflict. The walls that had once echoed with tension now reverberated with shared memories and hope for the future. I realized that the struggle had not merely been about the house, it had been about reclaiming connection, asserting respect, and reaffirming the bonds that define us as family. One evening, as the sun dipped below the London skyline, casting long golden shadows through the windows, I stood alone in the backyard. The flowers I had planted bloomed gently, their colors vivid against the soft light. I felt a profound sense of completion, not because the conflict was forgotten, but because it had been addressed, confronted, and resolved. I had fought for what was mine, not out of stubbornness or pride, but out of a deep-seated need for integrity and self-respect. Looking back on the months of struggle, I recognized the transformation, not only in my family but in myself. I had learned the power of persistence, the importance of communication, and the value of standing firm in the face of adversity. My relationship with my parents and brother was not perfect, but it was honest, grounded in mutual understanding, and, above all, real. As the lights of London twinkled against the evening sky, I felt a quiet contentment. The house, now a living testament to resilience and love, stood as a symbol of what can be achieved when one fights not with malice, but with conviction, clarity, and heart. I knew that life would continue to present challenges, but I also knew that I possessed the strength, courage, and wisdom to meet them. And in that knowledge, I found peace. The home that had been at the center of conflict had become the anchor of understanding, the foundation of renewal, and the reminder that family, though imperfect, is worth every effort to preserve and cherish. Standing there, I realized that the greatest victory was not in legal triumph, but in the restoration of connection, the reclamation of identity, and the enduring presence of love within the walls of our cherished home.